Hey guys, what's up? Time for another game theory video. Remember, if you like these videos, like, sub, chili, comment, share, support the channel if you want. I appreciate it. Thanks. Because I gotta be honest, talking about this same goddamn fucking shit all the time, it gets kind of boring. It's hard to motivate myself. So anyway, in this video, I'm gonna throw a lot of concepts, ideas, phrases, whatever you want to say, that I've used in past videos before. And I'm kind of gonna metaphorically throw it all at a wall at once, right? And hopefully some of these pieces stick well enough that they can kind of solve the puzzle, so to speak, or you can kind of get what I'm going for. So I want to talk about why Street Fighter 2 is important, because I think a lot of people, they talk about like, oh, I have this favorite niche game, or I like this favorite anime game and it's the best, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, why is it even that great? What about it is so great if you hate Street Fighter 2, right? Because I see people in comments or in comments in my videos a lot of times, to paraphrase, they're like, oh, the legacy of Street Fighter 2, it just clouds people's judgments. It's not that great. It gets a lot of unjustified praise, blah, blah, blah. And again, I always think, well, if you hate Street Fighter 2, what is so great about your anime game, your niche game, right? And especially because, one of the problems is when people have a favorite game or a game that they hate, they can't look at this game logically, right? And, I've often talk about how people, they tell fairy tales about these games that they like or they dislike. And they tell a fairy tale to fit their narrative about this game, right? So that's why I always say that I don't even have a favorite game, right? I try to appreciate all kinds of games, right? Because no game is perfect. All games have their good and their bad, right? To different varying degrees. And it just kind of comes down to what are the good parts of the game and what are the bad parts about the game, and do those good parts, are those more fun to me than the bad parts? Do they outweigh that, if you get what I'm getting at, right? So people will say, well, what is so great about the system of Street Fighter 2? What is so important about it compared to whatever insert anime or niche video game that I like? You know what I mean? What is so great about Street Fighter 2 system? And I'm like, well, I think you're looking at it wrong, right? It's not the Street Fighter 2 system, so to speak, that is different than these other fighting games. It's that Street Fighter 2 is the foundation. That's what I keep telling people in my videos, right? It's the foundation of what made fighting games actually work. That made fighting games not just, Street Fighter 2 is not just an important fighting game, it's one of the most important video games ever, right? It's the basis off of what we all know, to different varying degrees, right, of fighting games, right? So there's tons of fighting games, right, that have a lot of great or potentially great new ideas or spins or new systems that they can add to a fighting game, right? But the problem is really, sometimes these games, they just don't have the foundation supporting these new ideas, right? And the foundation is what made fighting games great in the first place. Those basic concepts of these kind of characters, these archetypical characters are strong, these archetypical strengths of moves are important to what make fighting games, right? And I've used this example so many times of Guilty Gear, right? Guilty Gear went from a game that was, okay, Guilty Gear was a niche game, okay? Guilty Gear was not, quotation marks, the anime game per se at first, right? It was just another niche game and a bunch of other fucking fighting games, right? But it became the anime game, so to speak, and it became one of the most important fighting games ever, along with Street Fighter, when the casual audience could finally see Street Fighter in Guilty Gear. Not that it didn't exist before, but like I said in my videos, narrative is important, right? There's a narrative in video games when you are selling a game to an audience, right? And it's important in that narrative to have characters that are strong in the meta, so that when the casual audience is watching this game played competitively, they can see this character and they can learn the game through them, right? Let me take a drink of water, sorry. So, I talk about that and watch the video of how the dust loop saved Guilty Gear, right? Guilty Gear went from a series that was just surviving and it went to succeeding because of this. Soul's fundamental gameplay, so to speak, is very kind of Street Fighter in a sense, right? Of course, there's going to be the anime niche, slob, nerd, Jimmy math nerd, whatever, who they say they hate Street Fighter 2 because they hate simple things. And simple things have too much of an influence on a match, right? And go watch that, how I talk about the progression of fighting games. I've made videos about the hypocrisy of that. But, you know, for the sake of this argument and video, right, that stuff they say has too much of an influence on a game. But somehow they love Guilty Gear. They love Soul. But what is Soul doing when he is being effective, so to speak, in Guilty Gear? That same nerd who hated something simple like a dragon punch or a throw mix-up having such a big influence on a match, that simple kind of guessing game, that simple guessing game that they hate in Street Fighter is what made Soul good, so to speak, in Guilty Gear XX, right? And because he was in the competitive narrative of the game, because that simple mix-up was so powerful, he taught the audience Guilty Gear, right? Because to make that effective in Guilty Gear, the difference for it to do good damage, to be effective in the new system of Guilty Gear, the plot line for this narrative of what a fighting game can be, it involved these new things in Guilty Gear. RC, jump cancels, chain combos. Even when you're defending against this simple mix-up, you have to use other plot lines of Guilty Gear like FDing, right? It was like the perfect storm, a great recipe for success for this game, because Guilty Gear went from a, niche game, whatever, anime game, whatever, but it then became the anime game that had all this goodwill put into it that you could see, progression of what a fighting game could be, but you could see the foundation of Street Fighter in Guilty Gear. A very easily digestible idea was powerful in Guilty Gear finally, right? And that easily digestible idea is something that we've seen before in Street Fighter 2. The same one that this niche anime slob math nerd Jimmy, supposedly, whatever you want to fucking call it, supposedly that they fucking hate about Street Fighter 2, that they think Guilty Gear is so special. Their game was not special, so to speak, until a character like Soul became popular or became powerful in the meta. Because then the casual audience could see Street Fighter and Guilty Gear, the foundation of what made fighting games popular. Powerful dragon punches, invincible dragon punches that had big influences on the match. Throws that had big influences on a match. Something simple that the Jimmy supposedly hates. Of course, this goes into inevitably something that I always mention is that this idea that most people are not good at video games, most people cannot talk about video games in an intelligent way. It's very rare to meet somebody who can do one of them, let alone both of them, okay? So again, inevitably then, we come to this again, right? Now that more people are playing this niche anime game, whatever it might be, once again, this game is becoming more mainstream because the people can see the Street Fighter in it. Well, since now more people are going to play this game that only had so many people playing it beforehand, these so-called quotation marks masters of this specific game, you see they're not that great. Because also, inevitably, some people are just better at games than others. It doesn't matter that this so-called master of the game, who had a huge head start on everybody, quotation marks, right? It doesn't matter. Because often if someone is good at one fighting game, to different varying degrees, of course, right? It's not totally equal, but there is a bit of overlap of skill to a certain degree, right? These people that are good at one fighting game are probably going to at least be able to kind of get on a roll or kind of get a quick head start in this game, right? Or get their feet wet easily, right? These same nerds that complain about simple things in Street Fighter 2 having such an influence on a match are going to get beat by these same simple things now in their great game, despite playing the game for however long beforehand, all these other guys, right? These same nerds that hate being locked down by fireballs all day or something in Street Fighter 2 because they say it's not a skill, you know? Complete hypocrites, because then they will love Guilty Gear when Guilty Gear has become a series where it's just basically I knock you down into my bullshit, right? Oh, you got to hold this mix up. It's a fucking phrase in fucking, you know, it's become such a fucking phrase in fighting games. It's like the hypocrisy of the community is funny to me, that you can say that you hate Street Fighter 2 because you hate blocking fireballs, when Guilty Gear has basically popularized the idea to such an extent that it's become almost a meme of, you got to hold this shit. You know what I mean? I knock you down into my bullshit and now you got to block all day. I think, like I said, it's one of the things, like, as much respect as I have for Guilty Gear, I actually think Guilty Gear is even worse in that aspect than Street Fighter 2. And people hate Street Fighter 2 that love these new games. That's why I always say it's funny to me, if you can't appreciate anything about Street Fighter 2, I don't think you actually like fighting games. I think you just like winning at a game when no one else is playing it. Do you get what I'm getting at, right? Because you can be sure once someone else that is actually good at video games learns your game, they're probably going to fucking beat you, right? Which we can use this example at that I've used before as I take another drink of water. Oh boy. Too much talking today, dude. Another game that I've used before when I talk about examples of this is, like, look at a game like Karna's Revenge, okay? I often say there's a fine line in Karna's Revenge of it being a completely scrub-a-dub game and a deceptively skillful game. But for this video, let's word this a little bit different, and let's say that it's a fine line between a game being completely scrub-a-dub and a game that is deceptively competent for a niche game, okay? And this is where a problem can lie, a quotation marks problem, right? So many of these Jimmies who think that this game is special. Oh, it's my special game. We only have so many people that even play the game at one time. Well, you know what I mean? Wait, I'm sorry, dude. There's so much fucking talking. You know what I mean? They think they're special because they're one of the only cool kids that know about the game. Whatever I'm trying to say, right? Well, if their game is truly competent and at least has somewhat of a foundation for the game, right? Once someone who is actually generally good at video games comes along, them having a heads up on the game, them playing the game more than the other person isn't going to matter for that long, right? And I'm a perfect example, because why was I able to beat everyone in this game, basically, when I just casually learned the game in 2 weeks all those years ago? I went from 2 weeks learning the game casually to competing with all the best there was, to then within a few months, I was the best in the world. Why recently was I, after not playing this game for all these years, able to beat all these dudes who dedicate their life to playing this game legitimately? Because if the game is somewhat competent, and there are some core concepts of what made fighting games actually what they are today, if you can actually see the foundation of what fighting games are based off of to varying degrees in a different game, you can see the foundation of what wins in a video game, right? And inevitably, like I said, some people are just better at video games. The problem with these niche anime video game communities, whatever it is, this niche game, this video game thing is, right, is often, like I said, when people play these games, they tell fairy tales about how games are played, how this game is better than Street Fighter 2, or this game sucks, this game is good, blah, blah, Street Fighter, whatever kind of comparison they're doing. And it's like, you're only saying that because you're winning at this game and you can't have an intelligent conversation. Because you can bet once someone that is actually good at a video game or can have an intelligent conversation with you, your opinion is going to change very quickly, or you're going to try to cancel that person, as they did me. You motherfuckers couldn't beat me for 4 months straight. You had to get me banned on Fightcade, right? You know what I mean? Again, often if you look at a game, if it's at least somewhat competitive, you'll be able to see the Street Fighter 2 in it. Do you get what I'm saying at? Why is Street Fighter an important video game? Because often if a video game is even competent, you're going to be able to see Street Fighter in it, right? If you can't see the Street Fighter in your video game, your game really is probably niche and it's probably not that great of a game. And it probably has a lot of fucking problems. Because that is what happens with video games nowadays. Again, one of the only new things you can do in a video game is make a new system in a video game, right? To try to throw a new spin on it, right? That's the good shit. But the problem is that so many times these games, they try to destroy the foundation of what made fighting games popular in the first place. These fundamental core ideas, right? There's lots of new systems that can potentially be good. There's potential in new systems, like I've talked about through all these fucking game theory videos, and I've talked about so many different video games, whatever, right? But the problem is, so many times, if the game is fundamentally flawed, you can't show off your game properly, right? Hopefully, you get some of the stuff I'm talking about here, dude. You know what I mean? So I'm trying to get at, like, why is Street Fighter 2 important? You know what? Because if your game is actually good, you're going to be able to see some Street Fighter 2 in it, like it or not. And when a lot of times when these people say that they hate Street Fighter 2, they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. They probably don't actually like fighting games. They probably don't like fighting games, or they don't know what they're talking about. You see these Guilty Gear nerds, oh, I don't like Street Fighter 2, but I like Guilty Gear. What did you like about Guilty Gear before, you know what I mean, before you could see the Street Fighter? Because Guilty Gear, it had some goodwill in it, right? But a lot of these people, the game was kind of broken. Before the system mechanics got fleshed out a little bit more, blah, 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 you know what I mean? And then you saw characters like Soul started becoming stronger, you know what I mean? And then even after that, you know what I mean? I think it's funny that people say they hate Street Fighter 2, but they will dick suck and try to, make excuses for Guilty Gear when, again, Guilty Gear, if anything, Guilty Gear is a worse offender of, oh, I got to hold this shit and block. That's why I think it's so funny, like, oh, I can't stand getting locked down by a fireball trap in Street Fighter 2. But it's okay getting locked down in Guilty Gear when it's actually become like a fucking meme. And I've talked about it so many times. Guilty Gear just became, it's why I got bored of the game. The game just can become, every character just, it's my version of knock you down into my big fireball bullshit. The characters started becoming less interesting. And, for what it's worth, like I said, Strive, I think Strive has done a really good job of reinventing characters. I think the developers deserve a lot of credit for how they reinvented characters. I think it's pretty ingenious, a lot of characters, right? But then you see there's a lot of fundamental flaws kind of in Strive. It's kind of shaky. It has some like shaky foundation, and the new systems in the game are very shaky too, right? So, yeah. I don't know. I talk about this shit so often, but I saw people bring up this Street Fighter 2 shit again, and whatever.